Travis Rupp, he is the Research and Development Manager at Avery Brewing here in Boulder, where he has worked for nearly 5 years. This team, of which he's a part, is responsible for Avery's beer invention, innovation, and barrel aging in a program that now maintains approximately 3,500 oak barrels. He is also an advanced sensory panelist. He holds the title of Beer Archaeologist at Avery as well, and has sparked a new series of research on ancient and historically inspired beers. The first of his historic ales launched in September 2016, titled Nestor's Cup. He has been a full-time adjunct professor of classics, art history, and anthropology at the University of Colorado at Boulder since 2010, teaching all things Egyptian, Near Eastern, Roman, and Greek. For 17 years, he has been an avid home brewer and been experimenting with and researching ancient and antique beer production. As a result of his careers and passions, Travis is writing a book on the beginnings of beer in the ancient Mediterranean. Recently, his travels and research abroad have focused on Greek beer production from the Bronze Age through the era of Alexander the Great. So please join me in welcoming Travis Rupp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming out. I like to see that beer won out tonight instead of football, even though we know beer and football go hand in hand. But yeah, thank you all for coming this evening. I am going to move through a lot of different information over the next hour, just covering a lot of topics regarding Egyptian, Near Eastern through to Roman and Greek brewing. But where we really begin with all of it, if we were to kind of start our discussion, we kind of start with the Fertile Crescent of the ancient world. Primarily this region is known as being the Fertile Crescent because of its very diverse climate, and we do presume that there was a lot of food source and beverage source that was being constructed or produced very early on. I mean, even dating as far back as the pre-pottery Neolithic era, you get the dates there, 8,000 to 6,000 BC. We see them using a lot of different products for certainly food, but they were experimenting with them too for different beverages. A primary example that I've been working with quite a bit, and with Nestor's Cup, I know some of you have talked to me already and have had the chance to try that out at Avery. One thing that I focus on quite a bit is trying to figure out when barley was starting to be produced in the first place. And wild barley, which we in the Latin is just Hordeum vulgare, seems to have been something that was produced very early on, even to the extent that I would question to a degree what that dating is. Most of the time when we talk about the domestication of crops, the traditional view is that it occurred somewhere around 5,000 BC. I think it probably was much earlier than that, as you'll see in just a moment. But this area of the Fertile Crescent, also the origins of agriculture. Barley was probably the first one that was domesticated, followed by two different types of wheat, both emmer and einkorn wheat, which we'll be discussing also in just a bit. Now, why I say that I question to a certain degree the dating system for exactly when we see the domestication of crops, especially barley, is that this is a map showing ancient Syria circa about 9,000 to 8,500 BC. What you see on the map is density of forestation that was throughout most of that territory that we do know now as modern-day Syria. But within a time frame of about 500 years or so, it looked like this. A lot of climatic studies and just looking at climatic shifts that were going on between 8,500 and 8,000 BC show a massive amount of deforestation that occurred in this region of the Fertile Crescent. And by 8,000 BC, all that you see that's really anything that's heavy forestation is primarily just along in this band right here, fairly close to the border, really, of the Mediterranean. What took its place, though, what you see in all of this area, was the outcropping or just the popping up in very large quantities of Hordeum vulgare. This wild barley all of a sudden kind of came into the mix. It's not as though they're necessarily domesticating right away between 8,500 and 8,000 BC, But when you have a resource that's so readily available for you, you're going to start to use it probably very, very soon or very quickly. The question then becomes, was it for food or was it for beverage? I do think that probably they were using it for beverage earlier or in a higher frequency than they were for food, just because it's easier to process for beverage. Plus, in that regard, water wasn't always that safe to drink in some regions. They probably learned that fairly early on. Plus, beer in its own right does have a nutritional value to it. Now, in regards to the difference between 6-row and 2-row, I'm sure many of you have heard that designation before, or if you're even a home brewer, we use it fairly regularly. There is a distinction between 6-row and 2-row that does occur in the ancient world, but when we're